So we know the history behind the Babylonian captivity or the Babylonian exile. We heard Jeremiah talk about it. After years of tension with Babylon, of double dealing and duplicity and wars and rumors of wars, King Zedekiah of Israel, he made alliance with Egypt, and Babylon then swooped in one more time to end the problem once and for all. And the people, the nation that had strayed from who they once were, was now taken into exile in Babylon. And we know that history. Do we really feel it? We appreciate what is in life. So I invite you briefly this morning to close your eyes and take a deep breath. Imagine yourself. You're in your house, but it's not a place of comfort. You're in your house, but you and your neighbors are being rounded up because there's been a war and we've lost it. And the enemy, it doesn't matter who they are, but the enemy is going now from house to house, telling each family to gather up whatever they can, whatever they can carry, and prepare to leave. And as you get this word, you're in a daze, you're looking around your house trying to figure out what you actually need, what you just have to hold on to. You know you're never coming back. And you do the best you can gathering things up, all the while knowing that your time is running short. And sure enough, in too short a time, you are herded into the street, you and your family. You gather there with your neighbors. And you're all in the street clutching and grabbing and dragging everything that you absolutely can't part with, and then your group starts to move down the street, and you get to the next block, and then more people join together. Your neighbors. You start walking. And finally, there's this mass of you walking, stumbling along the road, and your eyes are stinging from the smoke of burning buildings, and your nostrils are full of death and ashes. And even though you've just started walking, you feel like you've been walking forever in your town. In this imaginary time, it's Salem. Town is burning around you. And you look over and you see the church, this place where you worshiped. This place is burning. And you know you'll never be able to worship as you have. And all of this is reeling through your head as you stumble down the streets and along the road, and the life that you managed to plunder from your own house is already being hard to carry. It's heavy. And you feel like you've walked 1,000,000 miles already, but you've only gone just a little ways, and you know you have 500 miles to go. For us, that would be like walking from here to Kansas City. Whatever we could carry to start a new life. That's what the people went through. Can you feel even a little bit of their loss, a little sense of their anguish at this time? And yet, for all of the anguish and all of the loss, the Babylonian exile was a formative time for the children of Israel. As much, or nearly as much, as the exodus from Egypt itself, the exile shaped and defined who they would be in the centuries to come. Remember, for this culture, Jerusalem, the city they left behind, and the temple in Jerusalem, which was now destroyed, that was the only place where they could make sacrifice to their God. And that was the only place, that they gathered to worship. Now it was gone. It wasn't just in their rearview mirror. It was destroyed. It was burned. It was leveled. Not only had they lost the protection of their God, but they had lost the very ability to worship Him as they had. Everything they knew and everything they believed and everything they thought they were had been stripped away. And they mourned. They grieved for the loss of what had been, as the psalm today painted a picture of that grief, and for me anyway, it just grabs right at the heart. But not unlike the trials and tribulations that their ancestors faced on the long walk from Egypt, all of these things combined to make the people of Israel into something new. Something more than they had been. We'll call it Israel 2.0. And in a practical sense, what it meant was that since the temple was gone, synagogues became appropriate places of worship. Without the ability to sacrifice, the study of the Torah and the interpretation of God's words to humanity now became more important than ever. Preservation of that word is vital. Scholars and teachers and scribes evolved into rabbis, teachers, and they became critical to rediscovering their strength, rediscovering who they were in connection with God. Great effort was made to copy and recopy and to preserve the words of God in exile. And over the decades, the people of Israel, the exiled children of God, came to an understanding of where and how they had failed Him. And more importantly, perhaps they came to an understanding of what they needed to do in order to reconnect with Him. After losing everything, almost everything, they actually were able to regain their identity. They were able to rediscover who they had been before the time when their culture started to slide, and they rediscovered who they had been before they got lost and strayed from God. When that happened, when they had reformed and started to re-emerge as the people of God, Cyrus of Persia swept in and conquered Babylon. He set them free. And they returned to their homeland, the homeland of their ancestors, where they would flourish once more. And when they returned, they brought with them a new version of what it meant to be the people of Israel. They brought with them a new way to be in relationship to God. They would still restore the temple. And sacrifices would still be made, and they would still rebuild Jerusalem and its mighty walls. But now the synagogues, the gathering places for worship that were not in Jerusalem, took on new importance. And rabbis would start to exert new influence. For the rest of their history there, they would never again lose sight of their relationship with God. Some scholars believe that the Israelites because of the exile, went from being what are called monolateralists, which meant that they believed in the supremacy of God, their God, over all other gods. They went from being that to being monotheists, meaning that they believed there was just one God, their God. And it's an interesting theory. Not everybody buys it. But if it's true, that was likely due to the influence of different monotheistic religions in Babylon. And perhaps it caused them to look at their relationship with God and say, you know what? We've got God. There is just one. But regardless of that, the Israelites held their culture together. They clung by their fingernails, holding on for dear life, trying to figure out what had to be done and what should be done. And once they had that figured out, they took the next step and they did it. They regained who they were. And curiously enough, that same sense of doing what's right comes into play thousands of years later in this gospel passage that we read today from Luke. It figures into that. Remember, Luke tells us that the opening of this passage that the disciples asked Jesus to increase their faith. They heard him talk about faith often enough in Greek, pistis. So now the disciples came to Jesus and they said, Jesus, pump us up with some of that faith stuff, will you? When you think about it that way, the way they approach it, it's almost like this faith is a substance, something that can be quantified. We want more. I read that this week and I had that image, I think it's from Oliver. The disciples coming up and saying, please, sir, can we have some more? But having asked the question, and it seems to happen fairly regularly, Jesus then, his answer goes off on this tangent. At least it seems like a tangent. Because he starts talking about having just the faith of a mustard seed. And then he goes further off base by talking about servants doing what they're supposed to, and why should they be thanked for doing what they're supposed to do. No doubt some of the disciples may have walked away from that discussion scratching their heads again. I'm pretty sure if we had pictures of the disciples, most of them would have bald spots this time. Doing a lot of that after talking to Jesus. But it occurs to me that maybe Jesus was not being obtuse at this time. Maybe he was right on point answering their question. Let's look at that. The disciples come and say, Lord, increase our faith. Blah, blah, blah. We know that part. And then Jesus says, guys, if you had faith, it's like a mustard seed. You could make this tree dance. Something like that. Here's the thing. What if Jesus wasn't really talking about quantity? What if he wasn't saying if you had just this much faith? But instead he was talking about quality. Take a look back in Luke. There are other places Jesus talked about faith. In chapter 5, a group of men cut a hole in a roof and lowered a paralyzed man in to be with Jesus. And Jesus said, because of their faith, the man is forgiven and healed. Chapter 7, a Roman centurion sent servants to ask Jesus to heal another servant of his. He's trusting that Jesus would do it. Jesus says, because of the centurion's faith, the man is healed. Later on, chapter 7, a sinful woman anoints Jesus. She does the right thing by showing him honor. And he says to her that because of her faith, she is forgiven. Chapter 17, he heals a leper, and when the leper comes back to thank Jesus, he tells him that his faith made him well. And there's more incidents like that. Do you see the commonality there? We think of faith as being something kind of warm and fuzzy, something intangible. But quite often, at least when Jesus uses the word, he's referring to somebody's willingness to act on what they believe. Faith isn't what they're thinking, it's what they're doing. And that's really interesting because with that in mind, you look back at the passage and say, why compare faith to a mustard seed? Because this tiny seed does something. When you plant it, it grows. When you nurture it, it grows incredibly and it turns into this tree. The operative concept there is the seed does something. It doesn't possess some quality, but it does something. It doesn't sit there and think, wow, I hope I become a tree. Wow, I believe I can become a tree. Even though it's small, it acts. And by acting, it grows. So I think you can make the argument at least that that's what Jesus is telling the disciples, and that's what he's telling us. Faith is not something nebulous. Faith is not what you believe, but faith is action. Faith is doing. Faith is doing the right thing. It's being persistent in the pursuit of good. It's helping people. It's reaching out. And we think of that as faith in action, but Jesus arguably would call that just plain faith. Start out by doing a little bit, because you know it's right. If you're persistent, you end up doing a lot. Faith, like a mustard seed, might be a way of saying that no act of good, however small, is wasted. Because if you touch a life, you never know how that life changes. You touch a life, even something small, and you don't know what chain reaction you just started. But the key, and this is what Jesus told his disciples, the key is that you start. And you start by doing. When we start, who knows what that goes into?